The first movie we have up, released December 13th, 2019, We Summon the Darkness. So, directed by Mark Myers and written by Alan Trezza, starring Alexander Daddario, Kean Johnson, Maddie Hassan, Logan Miller, Amy Forsyth, Austin Swift, and Johnny Knoxville of Jackass fame. So, it is, in a nutshell, the film follows a trio of girls who are looking to have a good time as they sacrifice their boy toys to their dark god. And twists and turns and unexpected things occur. Shit obviously goes fucking haywire. And a couple of surprises from a film that I thought was going to be fairly boilerplate, but turned out to be pretty smartly written. I kind of enjoyed it. It was a fun little romp. Hey man, hot chicks doing bad things. You can't argue with that shit. You can't argue with hot chicks doing bad shit.
You're talking about one of the oldest tropes that we've seen in horror films.
Make sure you emphasize that. Oldest tropes in horror films.
I tell you, if Nosferatu, right, if it was able to have hot chicks doing bad things in it, they would have had it too. On top
There you go. I rest my case.
Some nice 12 frames per second. Girls.
Hey, Charlie, well, good to see you. But yes, hot chicks doing bad things. That's always, yes, it's an old trope. Why is it an old trope? Because it works. Especially,
does it though?
Especially Alexander Daddario. True Detective season 1. That's all I'm going to say.
She looks weird in the face.
Who doesn't look weird in the face?
There is.
That's fair.
This is true, but there is an appeal to hot chicks doing bad things. There is.
Can I just say?
Yes.
Can I just say that I figured this movie out in the first 5 minutes?
It was unfortunately predictable.
There's predictable, and then there's grossly predictable. So predictable that not only did I figure out who was going to die first, I figured out who the plot twist was. Everything, the whole movie. If you're paying attention for even just a little bit in the first maybe 10 minutes of the film, you've got the whole thing figured out.
But with films, most films are actually predictable. It's more about a matter of how you get there versus what's going to happen in the end. I mean, when you watch, say, like a rom-com, for example, we know the guy and the girl get together at the end. Everybody
but that's a rom-com.
I will say the Lighthouse was not predictable. I didn't know what.
Oh, I mean, there are certain films out there that obviously they're not predictable. But the thing is that the majority, over 50% of films out there are predictable to a degree, because you follow certain patterns that work, you follow certain stories that work. People are expecting different things, and especially nowadays with film, where originality is something that's not necessarily looked at or looked for right now. We get all these books and remakes and all sorts of kind of stuff. People sometimes just want to already know the ending.
Well, there's this ironclad grip that Hollywood has on formulaic filmmaking. And yes, there's a reason why particular formulas exist in filmmaking, and they teach them to us. Like 3-act structure and specific narrative tropes that you typically stick to, because these are what have stood the test of time. These are what
I hear all that.
So, unfortunately, that does make them somewhat predictable. It does.
No, but here's the thing. There's a difference between being somewhat predictable and the film looking like it was a film student's first film ever. And I'm not talking about the way it looks. No, I'm talking about the way it's put together. It screams overly formulaic. Like the 20 years ago, it may have been a cool little twist, but now everybody's looking for it. And if you're not looking for it, you've never seen a horror film before. This was not a horror film made for horror film buffs. This was a horror film made for people who've never seen a horror movie before.
Or people who enjoy watching hot chicks do bad things.
Or people who just enjoy mindless entertainment.
I consider it a decent time waster. It was a fun little time waster.
Sure. For time wasting, okay, I'll give you that. But when we're talking about having an actual experience watching a film. This is lackluster at best.
I will say it struck me very much because Alexandra Daddario, lead actress in the film, she was a child actress, and as she's come up, she had a particular image that she was maintaining. But I've noticed that there's been a twist in her career where she's definitely attempting to shed that image. It started with
puberty.
Exactly, yeah. And so she's definitely taken on roles that are more mature, that are typically more graphic, that are definitely more challenging, and don't fall into the stereotype that she was being slid into. So I do admire the taking on different stuff, but it did kind of feel like a Alexandra Daddario vehicle in order to help her shed that squeaky clean girl next door image that she was developing so much.
But didn't she already do that in that Rock movie, San Andreas?
Not really, because not really. She was the Rock's daughter. I mean,
yeah,
that's pretty much it.
Yeah, she was just like the girl in distress.
Yeah,
like the damsel in distress. Basically, it.
That's I have to say, she was plot vehicle. She was plot vehicle in that one. She's
plot vehicle in this one too.
She was just driving the plot jeep. That's all she was doing. Hey,
that's all she's doing. She's literally driving the plot jeep in this one.
Well, I mean, but I think this was a vehicle that she took specifically to help her shed that image.
And I get it. Look, I don't have a problem with performance. Like all the players did a very good job. The performances are excellent. It's just the movie itself, the story, everything about it. It's terrible. I mean, and my wife looked at me when I told her about this film, and I said, "Hey, look, I figured this thing out." And she was like, "Yeah, but you do that with all these movies."
Yep.
I said, "No, it's not like that. It's like I feel like anybody could sit down here and pay attention just a little bit and figure this whole movie out. Like the second they showed Johnny Knoxville, I was like, okay, cool. This is it right here. Boom, boom, boom. I don't know if we're supposed to do spoilers or not, but you know what? Fuck it. This movie's 2 years old. The second I saw Johnny Knoxville, I was like, yep, that's the bad guy. The second, and he shows up in the first 3 minutes.
It's kind of obvious,
right? And then
he's Johnny Knoxville. So.
He's Johnny Knoxville, right? So why else would you have him in this part unless it's for a certain reason? And then when the Alexandria's character watching us, oh, okay, cool, that's her daddy, and he's the one orchestrating all these killings. And these girls are not real. These girls are just a bunch of Jesus freaks trying to do this, that, and the other to get people to go back to Jesus. It was bad. It was so telegraphed. You might as well just wrote it on crayon in the bottom of the film. Well, hey, this is what we're gonna do.
It also lends itself because it can be said that because you mentioned the film itself and the story. Now,
right.
Stylized versions of Satanism exist, kind of like Satanism is an old trope, is a very, very old trope in film.
Right.
I mean, hell, the very first horror film ever made was House of the Devil, made in 1898. So, the curiosity is I would say the curious thing is that obviously the societal viewpoint of Satanism has changed very much over the decades. When it was brought up in, say, the 60s, the 70s, some of the 80s, maybe even before that, it was a very, very dark and very serious subject matter. So, like, you look at The Exorcist, you look at The Omen, you look at the majority of possession flicks that came out. Rosemary's Babies, The Bad Seed. Stuff like that. You're looking at, when they look at the concept of the devil, they look at the concept of demonic possession, or when you get into the realms of Satanism, the subject matter was always treated with a sort of reverence, that this is something very scary that we're dealing with. And you could tell that the filmmakers themselves, if they, most likely they were religious at the time, that they're dealing in a subject matter that is going to freak out audiences. And they're paying respect. By paying respect to the subject matter, they're also paying respect to the religion as well, to like Christianity or Catholicism, whatever. But today, 2020, Satanism, in my viewpoint, has become kind of slapsticky,
Mm-hmm. And I will say that this movie, that's one thing this movie does really well. The commentary on Satanism I think it's spot on, because it is treated with a sort of slapstick, reckless nature that probably mirrors more what people think of Satanism now versus what they did back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and maybe even as early as, or as late as late 90s, early 2000s. Because if you look at like all the Stigmata stuff that came out in late 90s, early 2000s, Blair Witch and all that other kind of supernatural but more spiritual natural type things. It's definitely become less of a ooh type thing and more of, it's treated in this film, it's treated very slapstick.
True. Yeah. There's a goofiness to it.
It's kind of just more exposure to even certain types of, because I started to think stuff like House of Thousand Corpses, where you have like Dr. Satan kind of thing, and you start like even more extreme films have become more mainstream.
Yeah.
On it.
Yep.
So going back to this film, and the fact even just talking about Satanism isn't enough for a film to be extreme now.
So does it fall into the category of stuff of kind of like shock rockers? Obviously, there was a time when Elvis Presley shocked audiences, and then of course you ramp it up and you go a little bit more. Then you've got like Kiss, and you've got AC/DC, and you've got the Rolling Stones, and fucking. You have for the Guar, and then Rob Zombie and Marilyn Manson, and so it keeps getting more and more. But eventually, we desensitize to it. So, given the extreme, when we go back to the '80s and the satanic panic that occurred in the '80s,
right,
that got so blown out of proportion, it became a national kind of epidemic. People were freaking the fuck out all over the place. Maybe it kind of desensitized the nation to it. Maybe they realized, well, nothing was really happening. No evidence came of it. We all freaked out about nothing. And then all of a sudden, people didn't look at Satanism the same way. It was like, it burst out there. Everybody freaked out. And then they realized that they freaked out over nothing. And now we can go back and we can look at Satanism, not through the same lens. Now it's not as scary as it was. We can deal with it. We got through the extreme fear that Satanists were hiding around every corner, stealing our children. That's not happening. So all of a sudden, okay, but now we're kind of desensitized to the nature of it, and it becomes more of a kind of throwaway trope. Oh, I hate weekend Satanists, don't you? That kind of shit, and just something silly that you could just throw in there.
Well, you also got to look at the generational gap, because when you have the satanic panic, and say in the '80s, most of those people were in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and you're talking about the 80s, 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So the adults today were the young kids listening to that music, watching those films, and they're the ones going, well, you know what? My parents are scared of it. I watched it, and I came out okay.
Yeah.
So I'm not as worried. Well, it's just like the internet becoming big. Oh man, Beast Ghost here, the internet. But when you get the generation that grows up with it, you're like, no, it's just part of life.
That's one big point. Is in the late '80s and the early '90s, techno horror was becoming a thing. Like technology run amok, and that was it. That was kind of like and then we got a lot of techno horror movies, especially overseas, like Japan and Korea. Especially foreign films were big on the uncertain future of where technology is heading.
Right.
But now we have generations that have grown up with it. We have people living now that never knew a world without the internet. Unlike us, we're a bunch of old fucking fogies.
Yeah, called flirts.
Yeah, we knew what the world was like with no fucking internet. But I find it interesting that Satanism has kind of fallen away. Even religion in general, like religious films, even they are kind of like, it's almost like something. It's just become a trope. It's not something that we shoot or use subject matter in reverence anymore. It's just like it's something to drive the story along, and the fact that attitudes can change like that is always interesting to me. That's why I love this genre so much, because we see that as the next generation adapts to it, horror continuously has to evolve in order to improve upon itself and still go for the shocks.
Absolutely.
That's fair.
No, definitely. On top of that.
So that brings me. Wait, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
A great one.
Oh, okay, yeah, there you go. So that brings me. I want to ask the audience, for all you horror fans out there who have seen all the horror movies you've seen, what is your favorite horror movie that involves Satanism, that has Satanism in it? It could be demonic possession, it could be satanic possession, whatever. What is your favorite one? Hit us up in the comments in the live chat, or shoot in the comments in the video, okay? Or hit us up, weekendhorror@gmail.com. We'd love to interact with you guys. This is awesome. We get to interact with you directly. This is a lot of fun for us. So, yeah, let us know your favorite horror, your favorite Satanism horror film. But we'd love.